April 5th, 1531, Smithfield, London. On most days, the air here smells of animals and ash. Today, it smells of terror. By the personal decree of King Henry VIII, a man is being lowered alive into a boiling cauldron. He isn't a noble traitor. He's a cook, accused of poisoning a bishop. But as the water churns, those watching sense this is no ordinary crime. In private letters, foreign ambassadors whisper that whatever happened here reaches far beyond a kitchen, perhaps closer to the throne than anyone dares say aloud. This is the story of the Boiling Act and the most horrible execution in English history. The tragedy began 7 weeks earlier. February 18th, 1531, Lambeth. Inside the London residence of John Fisher, the kitchen was a hive of activity. It was a bitter winter day, and the bishop was hosting dinner for 17 guests. Fisher was a man of two habits: iron discipline and radical generosity. When the meal ended, the leftovers were sent to the poor waiting at his gates. In the kitchen, the cook, Richard Roose, stirred a pot of pottage. Thick, hot, ordinary. Unnoticed, he added a white powder. A common stew shared by bishops and beggars alike. But as the bowls were carried into the dining hall, the afternoon took a violent turn. Within minutes, the room dissolved into chaos. Guests began to collapse, not with mild sickness, but with agonizing spasms. Men doubled over, clutching their stomachs, their skin turning a sickening shade of blue as their bodies fought for air. One of the first to die was Bennet Kerwin, a gentleman in the bishop's service. He went into violent convulsions and never recovered. Outside the gates, the tragedy deepened. Alice Trippitt, a widow hoping for a warm meal, ate the leftovers, staggered into the mud, and died there in the cold. By nightfall, 2 were dead. 17 more were fighting for their lives. And the man who should have been the primary target, the bishop himself, sat completely unharmed. Some said Fisher was fasting for a religious feast. Others whispered he was buried in paperwork and never touched his plate. Whatever the reason, the bishop survived. His dining hall did not. And as London reeled, one question spread faster than fear itself. Was this a failed assassination, or had something far more dangerous been uncovered? Rumors raced through the streets. If a bishop could be poisoned at his own table, who was safe? Poison wasn't like a knife or a fist. You couldn't see it, you couldn't hear it. By the time you felt it, it was already too late. The implication spread fast. If poison could reach John Fisher, it could reach anyone. Servants were questioned, households tightened their rules, meals were eaten with suspicion. In a city already split by religious tension, fear curdled into paranoia. And above the noise of the streets, Henry VIII was listening. Richard Roose didn't wait for a knock on his door. Within hours of the poisoning, he fled, vanishing into the labyrinth of London's alleyways. For a moment, it worked. But in 1531, a marked man couldn't stay hidden for long. Roose was hunted down, shackled, and dragged into the shadow of the Tower of London. Inside those damp stone walls, he faced the one thing every prisoner feared most: the rack. As the wood creaked and his body was stretched toward the breaking point, Roose finally spoke. But what he said only deepened the mystery. He insisted the deaths were an accident, a frolic gone horribly wrong. A stranger, he claimed, had handed him a white powder, promising it was nothing more than a powerful laxative, something to make the bishop's guests sick. A joke, he said, nothing more. But in the court of Henry VIII, there was no room for accidents. 2 people were dead, and the intended target, one of the king's most dangerous opponents, had survived by sheer chance. If Roose was telling the truth, then he wasn't a killer. He was a tool. Someone else had supplied the powder, someone who knew the rhythms of John Fisher's household and exactly when the charity bowls would be filled. The questions haunted the court. Who was the stranger, and why now? In the Tudor world, a prank that ended in death was never an accident. It was an assassination. and this was much bigger than a cook. For kings, poison was uniquely terrifying. A blade could be stopped, a rebellion could be crushed, but poison arrived quietly, carried by trusted hands. That was why royal meals were rituals, not comforts. Food was watched, handled by layers of servants, and often tasted before it reached the table. And Henry VIII understood this better than most. He had seen rivals fall across Europe. He knew how power invited betrayal. Now poison had entered his own story, not as rumor, but as fact. Because if a bishop's cook could be reached, then no one, bishop or king, was safe. It was a message. Even then, the unease did not fade. Richard Roose was a nobody, a lowly cook with no protection and no obvious motive. Why would a man like that risk a death so agonizing for a so-called prank? The question would not leave the court. Was Roose the architect or merely a pawn? His confession only deepened the mystery. A stranger, a white powder, a promise that it was harmless. That detail mattered. It implied coordination. One man to act, another to disappear. From the sidelines, the imperial ambassador, Eustace Chapuis, watched the king closely. In private letters, he noted that Henry VIII seemed to protest a little too much. Chapuis believed the king himself innocent. He was less certain about the lady, Anne Boleyn, or her ambitious father, Thomas Boleyn. To them, the bishop was not merely a priest, he was an obstacle. And in a court where power shifted over whispered alliances in private meals, poison was never just a crime, it was a signal. Once poison was understood as a political weapon, the king resolved to answer it the same way, with fear written into law. In early 1531, Henry VIII made his will unmistakably clear. He went to Parliament himself and pressed the case at unusual length. Poison, he argued, was not an ordinary crime. It could not be seen, could not be guarded against, and could reach even the most protected table in the realm. The task of turning fear into law fell to Thomas Cromwell. Cromwell moved quickly. Within weeks of the poisoning, a bill was drafted that treated poison not as murder, but as treason in spirit, a crime that threatened the stability of the entire kingdom. In March 1531, Parliament passed the Act of Poisoning. The punishment it prescribed was unprecedented in English law. Not hanging, not the axe, boiling alive. The logic was deliberate. If poison worked in secret, then justice would work in public. If the crime inspired silent terror, the punishment would inspire visible fear. This was not medieval excess. It was calculated policy. Henry did not merely approve the act, he demanded it. And Cromwell ensured it was written with no room for mercy. England had a new law, and Richard Roose would be the first, and only, man to suffer it. If the poisoning wasn't enough to convince John Fisher that his life was in danger, what followed removed any doubt. Not long after the incident at his table, a cannonball tore across the Thames. It smashed through the roof of the bishop's London residence, narrowly missing Fisher as he sat in his study. The shot was said to have come from a house across the river. Whispers quickly followed. Some claimed it belonged to the family of Thomas Boleyn, the father of Anne Boleyn. Whether accident or intent, the message was unmistakable. Fisher didn't wait to test his luck. Shaken and frightened, he fled London for the relative safety of Rochester, hoping distance might bring protection. It didn't. In October 1531, Anne Boleyn sent him a message, polite in tone, devastating in meaning. She advised him not to attend the next session of Parliament. She added with chilling irony that she worried he might fall ill again, as he had in February. The threat was thinly veiled, and it was understood. The imperial ambassador, Eustace Chapuis, would later confirm the motive. He wrote that there was no one in England whom the lady feared more than the Bishop of Rochester, not because Fisher commanded an army, but because he refused to bend. Threats had replaced whispers, and the next move would come from the throne. When the day of the execution arrived, London knew this would be different. There was no scaffold, no block, no axe. Instead, a massive cauldron had been prepared, large enough to hold a man. It sat over a roaring fire in full public view. This wasn't how England usually dealt with its criminals, and that was exactly the point. Richard Roose was brought out under heavy guard. There would be no blade to end it cleanly, no rope to steal his breath. What awaited him was far slower. He was lowered into the water alive. Contemporary accounts describe a process of horrifying precision. The executioners did not simply drop him in. They immersed him gradually, ensuring that death would not come quickly. The crowd watched as the water began its work. This was not justice carried out in the shadows. It was a warning, delivered at a boil. Under the terms of the new law, Roose had not been convicted as a common murderer. He was labeled a poisoner, a crime now treated as a direct assault on the state itself. Roose endured the ordeal for a long and agonizing time before finally succumbing. Whether he died from shock or exhaustion, the records are unclear. What they agree on is this: the sight left a scar on the city. The message was unmistakable. Under Henry VIII, the law was no longer a shield, it was a weapon. The reaction was immediate and uneasy. Many Londoners were shaken by what they had seen. Some approved, others were disturbed. Even in a violent age, this felt new. The law remained on the books, but it was never used again. The warning had been delivered. Repeating it would only raise questions the Crown did not want asked. But the execution we've just witnessed was only the beginning. Roose's prolonged agony at Smithfield served its purpose. It created a spectacle so horrifying that it drowned out a deeper scandal. While London watched a man boil, the court quietly moved on. But the legal machinery built that day did not stop with a cook. The bishop survived the poisoned pottage. He survived the cannonball. What he could not survive was the king's new definition of treason. Just 4 years later, John Fisher was trapped by legal technicalities crafted in the king's name, many shaped by Thomas Cromwell himself. The old bishop was led to the executioner's axe, not for violence, but for refusing to bend. Others followed. In 1540, the man who helped design the Boiling Act, Thomas Cromwell, was dragged to the scaffold himself. He was denied a proper trial, just as Roose had been. The system built to protect the king turned its gears inward. In Henry VIII's court, food could be poisoned, laws could be traps, and royal favor was never protection. It was exposure. Was Richard Roose a hired assassin or a reckless fool? We may never know. But his death at Smithfield stands as a warning from one of Tudor England's darkest moments. Under Henry VIII, fear did not merely enforce the law, it became the law.